Meetings. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on COVID vaccination. I'm Ravi Rana. I'm a clinical psychologist and director of therapies for the Trust, and we have an expert panel with us today who will be taking questions, who will be answering some questions and then taking some further questions. I'll be chairing today's session, and just to let everybody know, we will be recording it, so anybody who misses it or any colleagues who are not able to be here, it will be available for people to catch up with later, and we're hoping to be able to put it out on public websites after that for staff to have a further chance to look at. We do have a list of questions that we invited staff to give to us over the past week or two, and we've collected those into a series of the most frequently asked questions, and we're hoping to start by addressing those, answering those. There will be a chance for you to ask more questions in the chat box. We're not taking questions vocally because I think that will get very confusing. So if you do have a question that you want to answer, an answer to, please put it in the chat. I think you'll find that most of the questions that you have got in mind, we will pick up today. There is also a written document that Frank and the others have put together, the rest of the panel have put together to cover off all of the questions we've received so far. And that will be available. Again, Shamin will put that out so that people can look at that at their leisure. Any questions that come up that are not in that document, we will look at and we will try to answer in addition. And I should just say that it's in the nature of things that there will be questions we can't answer, and for that I'm sorry, but it's an area I know of that you'll appreciate, where there's a lot of continuing questions coming up, continuing uncertainties, and we haven't got all the answers, but we'll do our best to address what we can and point you in the right direction. Okay, so I'd like to start today by introducing our panel. Many of you will know most of the people here, but for those of you who don't, I think I mentioned that I'm the Director of Therapies for the Trust. Dr. Giovanni Satta is a Head of Specialty for Infection, Consultant in Infectious Diseases and Medical Microbiology at Imperial College Healthcare Trust. And he has been advising the Trust on our response through this pandemic. We also have with us Dr. Ben Braithwaite. He's a GP and clinical director for community health in Newham. And finally, we have Professor Frank Rohricht, who's a consultant psychiatrist and a medical director with the Trust, and has been following very closely all the latest research and advice that's been coming through. So I think we'll start now with the questions, unless any of the panel want to add anything at this stage. Nope. Okay, so the first question then, and this is one for you, Giovanni. Is there sufficient evidence to suggest that the vaccines result in protection against a COVID infection, given that the vaccines have only been developed in the past year?
Thanks, Ravi, and good afternoon, everyone. So the short answer is yes, there is evidence that the vaccine can give protection. And you will see a lot of data online and also on different websites, and also a lot of manipulation on the various percentage. So I always suggest, actually, if you are in doubt, always go to direct paper, because then you can actually find the direct data from there. So let's start with the protection when you receive the full course of a vaccine, so the 2 doses. So, and as you know, we got 3 main vaccines. We got the Pfizer, we got the Oxford, and we also got the new Moderna one. So in terms of the protection for the Pfizer one, is actually very effective because it gives you 95% of protection. So that means 95% of the people that received the vaccine didn't develop any infection. Okay, and then we got the Oxford one. So the Oxford one, the overall protection is around 70%, so 70 effective at preventive COVID-19 symptoms. And the last one is the Moderna one that give you 95% protection. So when I say read the paper, you will also say that there will be always some sub-analysis. Because, for example, when you consider like the Oxford vaccine, yes, let's take the elephant in the room, is less protection compared to the other ones. But actually that is protection for the development of severe disease. So when actually check actually the data, you will see that if you consider then like people developing then a severe disease in total, the Oxford vaccine confer a protection that is more than 90%. So people, they may still get COVID, that 30%, but none of them actually develop severe disease, also with the Oxford vaccine. So let's talk about then one dose. Okay, so, and the one dose again, you will see different percentage. So if you consider the Pfizer one, you will see in various articles and websites that the Pfizer vaccine, when you receive one dose, you will have to wait at least 12 days before your body can develop antibodies. And then they say the overall protection is 52%. However, that is not completely fair for the Pfizer vaccine, because if you actually check how many people and when they develop symptoms after receiving the vaccine, you will see that the majority of the infection, they were actually within 1 week. So actually it's not fair to say that the Pfizer vaccine is 52%, because actually if you take out those people that develop symptoms within 1 week, that means they were pretty much infected with the virus, with the real virus at the same time of the vaccine. Again, if you eliminate them, you will see that actually the Pfizer protection after 12 days is actually 90%. Okay, so in terms then of the Oxford vaccine, again, the protection is quite high when you received the first dose, and that is around 64%. And then for the Moderna one is a 95%. Again, let's point out that the fact that the vaccine after the first dose doesn't give you protection within 1 week is not actually a problem of the vaccine. It's actually a problem of our human immune system that inevitably it does need time to produce antibodies. So, but if you consider then the protection after 2 weeks, all of the vaccine, they give you a very good protection, even after 1 dose.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. There are a lot of questions I can see that are coming up already in the chat, and looking through them very quickly, that a lot of these we are going to come on to. We will be providing answers to those, but we'll keep a lookout for those that we hadn't immediately in mind to address, and try to pick those up as well. Just to say that Charmaine has put up a poll that we'd like you to complete at the beginning and at the end, and it's basically to see how likely you are to have the vaccine now, at the start of this webinar, and by the end of it to basically to see if it's changed your mind in any way, and that would be very helpful feedback for us too. Okay, if I can move on to the second question then, and this is one for you, Frank. How long will I be protected once I have immunity from vaccination?
Oops. Thank you, Ravi. So yes, that's a question that's, the answer to that question is much shorter, I have to say, than the answer to the first question, because in essence, we don't really quite know yet. So you may have seen the news coming through the last few days, a new study that has addressed this for the first time with some reliable figures, and that study suggested that immunity will be there for at least 5 to 6 months following the vaccination process. I suppose that there are some comparative figures from previous exposures to similar viruses, SARS viruses, so suggesting that immunity lasts definitely for 6 months, but most studies that I came across suggested 1 to 2 years. There are, however, a number of factors that will quite significantly impact on the question as to how long immunity lasts. For example, the term that you heard about, herd immunity, seems to be quite relevant here. So the more people are vaccinated and or go through a COVID infection, the higher the herd immunity rate. Now, it's been estimated that at least 82% of the population need to have immune status until we can actually reach a point of immunity across the population. So that is a factor that will obviously be quite relevant. How many people do actually accept the vaccination, and how many people are naturally immunized. There's also a discussion about the new variants, which we're going to address in a minute. So the question as to whether the current vaccination will give protection for some time to come will also depend on the fact on the question as to whether new variants emerge that are actually not covered by the process, the mechanism of the active immunization. And then finally, there's also individual differences because, as we know, the immune system has got two major players that are relevant here, the antibody production and the so-called T-cell response to immunity. And those do vary from person to person. But the short answer is at the moment, the data shows us that 6 months seems to be a safe bet. And everything beyond that is something that will be addressed with more findings from research, which is currently ongoing.
Thank you, Frank. If we move on to our next question now, are there any you want to pick up in the chat that you've seen, any of you so far? Looking through, I think we're going to cover most of these. Okay, if we move on to the next question now, this is one for you, Giovanni. How can we know the COVID-19 vaccine is safe if it's only been around for a few months?
It's a very reasonable question, and but the answer is yes. The vaccine is, again, a short answer. The vaccine are safe. So remember that the Pfizer vaccine has been given to more than 40,000 people. So actually it's been given to quite a lot of people. And the Oxford vaccine has been given to more than 10,000 people. So again, someone may argue why the Oxford vaccine, for example, is only being given to 1/4 of the people compared to the Pfizer one. And the answer is simple, because actually the Oxford one, as you know, is actually a different type of vaccine that they use, for example, an adenovirus as a sort of vector. And this model from Oxford is actually being used before for many other vaccines. So Oxford, they created, for example, a vaccine against malaria, for example, using exactly similar vector. So they already know that their approach in this process is actually safe for people. So the second point is that we know already that the vaccine, as you see every day on the BBC and on the various newspaper, is already being given all over the world to actually millions of people. I think like in UK, we're vaccinated now, we're approaching like 2 million, and it's growing. And again, in another country, in Italy, in Denmark, and also in Israel, everyone is being given the vaccine and also the Pfizer one. So again, we know from all those people that actually the vaccine overall is safe. And the final thing is the approval, international approval. Remember that before marketing a virus, not a virus, sorry, a vaccine, you need actually approval for major international bodies, including, for example, the MHRA for example, UK, and also the European Medicine Agency, and also the Food and Drug Administration in the United States. And trust me, I don't know if you've ever seen the process to actually get anything approved by this organization, but the process is really strict and robust. And so I would be happy that they've gone through all the data, they've asked all the relevant questions before actually licensing this vaccine. So again, the short answer is yes, I would be happy that these vaccines are safe.
Giovanni, there's one question in the chat that perhaps you can answer quickly. It's from Andrea. If vaccine is safe, why did Pfizer ask for a disclaimer against being sued?
Is again, that is a very reasonable one. Is the reason probably again, I'm not, I don't have any share in Pfizer. I actually had the Pfizer vaccine. I'm not, of course, a solicitor at all. I think the reason why they've done that is because inevitably you are diverting from what is your regular process. That the regular process would be probably to test like a drug or a new vaccine over the years, and then also wait for a long time before actually marketing that, because you also wanted to wait for example, long-term consequences. Okay, like for example, when you introduce a new antibiotic, let's say, the problem is, of course, we don't have that time in the middle of the pandemic, and I guess it wouldn't be fair for Pfizer to kind of be the scapegoat on any pharmaceutical industry, to actually be the scapegoat in saying, well, it's your responsibility to create the vaccine, because in that case, they may just simply say, why then the government doesn't take all the responsibility for this? So I can understand the legal implication, and I can see the potential negative impact that it can have on the uptake on the vaccine. But I do think for a big business, if I was in a business like this, I would have probably done exactly the same.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. I want to pick up on another question because it's come up quite a lot in the chat, and it's one for you again, I'm afraid, Giovanni. It says it's about PPE and shielding. Do I still have to wear PPE? Are we wearing the right PPE? And then Ben, I think if you could come in about shielding after that, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay.
So thanks, Sue. And this is again a very good question. And I'm afraid to say at the beginning, you will still have to keep using all the infection control measures what we are still doing. And that means, like, for example, a surgical mask, social distancing, and hand washing. And that is regardless if whatever vaccine you have received, and even if you are completely immune to COVID. The reason why we're doing this is because, unfortunately, again, because this vaccine has been approved quite quickly, and because COVID is a very clever virus, we still don't know, for example, if even if you receive the vaccine, you may have, for example, what is called a simple asymptomatic infection. And we don't know, like, for example, if you can transmit that asymptomatic infection to people that are not vaccinated, for example, yet. So inevitably, until we know more and we collect more data on this, we will still to use all the normal PPEs, social distancing, and also hand hygiene until we got more data.
Thank you, Giovanni. Ben?
Yeah, and leading on from that, unfortunately, the implication is that for people who currently need to shield, you'll need to continue to shield for the time being until the level of coronavirus transmission in the community drops to a safe level. That's partly because even once you've been vaccinated, as we've said, you don't get 100% protection. So there still is a risk of catching coronavirus, and then still a risk of becoming very unwell if you're in one of the shielding groups. And also, as we say, because we don't know yet what the effect of the vaccine is going to be on transmission. So somebody could still be well, but may still be able to transmit the virus. And there's science going on now, and there will be continued science going on to help us answer those questions. I can understand it's really frustrating. I was helping give vaccines to some of our over 80s patients at the weekend, and more than one person asked me, well, does this mean that I can hug my grandchildren now? And I had to say, unfortunately, no, not at the moment. You still need to follow all of the same rules until we've got enough of that herd immunity and the effect across the population.
Thank you, Ben. Ben, the next question is for you as well, and there's been a lot of people asking this in the chat in one way and another. And it's around the area of women who are not, it's about pregnancy and breastfeeding, that whole area really. So the questions that are being asked are, is the vaccine safe for women who are not pregnant but are thinking about getting pregnant in the next 12 months or so? Also, if they're breastfeeding, is it okay to continue with that? So if you could pick those up. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah. And again, really, really good questions. Partly, I think, and initially people may be aware that as the vaccines were being developed, the guidance was very kind of precautionary, very cautious in saying that women who are pregnant or breastfeeding shouldn't be vaccinated. And that's often the case with lots of newly developed medicines, just because understandably, pregnant women and breastfeeding women tend not to be recruited into drug trials. And so the initial data is limited on sort of safety and effectiveness. Having said that, the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency has loosened that sort of initial very sort of strict guidance to say that there's not a specific contraindication for women who are pregnant or who are breastfeeding, or indeed for women who are planning to get pregnant. And that's largely based on the way that we know these vaccines work, that there isn't a plausible mechanism to suggest that the vaccination would cause problems in pregnancy or to fertility or in breastfeeding. We know certainly for breastfeeding women that one of the benefits of breastfeeding is that you transmit protective antibodies in your breast milk to your baby, and we would expect that if anything that would be the same with as the effect with the coronavirus vaccine. That's not to say that it's kind of without risk, as we've said, that all of this is still sort of slightly uncertain. And so the advice certainly for pregnant women is to discuss with your healthcare professional, so with your GP or with the people at the vaccination centre, about where your risk benefit may lie. It may be that if you're pregnant and in one of the higher risk groups, so somebody who is also at risk of becoming seriously unwell, then the benefits and the protective benefits to you and to your pregnancy of the vaccine would outweigh those sort of small and theoretical risks. It may be that otherwise, if you're not in one of the higher risk groups, and maybe if your role at work, say, doesn't expose you to high risk of infection, it may be that you decide that for you, the risk benefit is in favor of not being vaccinated at the moment. And that's absolutely your choice. But certainly if you would benefit from the vaccine, there's no absolute contraindication to using it in pregnancy or in breastfeeding. That leads on to questions that have come up in the chat about effect on fertility. And I know that there has been some concern about this, and I think some sort of information or misinformation spread on social media. There have been a couple of stories worried that, or claiming that the coronavirus vaccine can reduce people's fertility. We have to say there's no evidence to support that at all. These kind of rumors on social media have been traced back to basically sort of dissatisfied people who have made them up. It is a worry or a kind of a story that's associated with lots of vaccines over history. That's one of the problems with getting everyone vaccinated against polio, because every now and then a story comes up to say that actually polio is a plot to sterilize people and to stop them having babies. That's not true. And similarly with the coronavirus, that's not true either, that we know that there's no evidence to suggest that it does have an effect on fertility. There's no real plausible mechanism to suggest how it might have an effect on fertility as well. So in terms of planning to get pregnant, both men and women, no worries that we have, and no real reason to worry about the effect of the vaccine.
Thank you, Ben. Can I also pick up on another question that's come up quite a lot in the chat, and it's about where people have allergies. Who would like to pick that one up? I
can keep on talking. Allergies are always something that we need to think about with any medicine, and certainly with vaccines. And there have been, I think, again, sort of in the media, some concerns or reports about severe allergic reactions, things like anaphylactic shock. Although we can be quite reassuring again about those risks, the first thing to say is that that is a risk that we know with any vaccine, and part of the vaccination training that everyone has to do to administer this vaccine is being able to recognize anaphylaxis and to treat it as well. And if anyone's been for their vaccination already, you'll know that the team there are really strict about making you sit and wait for 15 minutes after you've had your injection to make sure that you're not going to have an immediate sort of allergic reaction. Vaccination centers are also supplied with adrenaline and other equipment and medicines to treat an anaphylactic shock. there is a theoretical risk, as I say, of anaphylaxis, although interestingly, in the studies that have been done so far, the rate of severe allergic reactions to the vaccine was the same in both the vaccine group and in the control kind of placebo group. So people who had an inactive injection were just as likely to display symptoms of a severe allergic reaction as those in the vaccine group, which is reassuring, relatively speaking. We know that if anyone has had a severe allergic reaction to one of the components in the vaccine before, then they shouldn't have the vaccine. But that's the only contraindication in terms of allergy. In terms of people who've had allergic reactions to other things that we know about, say to foods or other medicines or bee stings or anything else, that's not a contraindication as long as the things that you're allergic to aren't in the vaccine. And the vaccination centers and the vaccinators have information about all of the ingredients there. I know some people in the chat have asked specifically about things like egg allergy. And that is an issue with some vaccines because some vaccines are developed in eggs, are grown in chicken egg, for instance. That's not the case with either of these vaccines. There's no egg or any animal products in the vaccine in the vial. So there's no reason to worry that your food allergy, say, will be triggered by the vaccination.
Maybe I should just add, people have asked for additional literature about those topics. We can certainly make primary sources available. And there's also a very detailed list published from the companies that produce the vaccines about all the ingredients in the vaccine. So we can make those available as well. They're documents that people can look at if and when they have a very clear question for a particular substance that they are concerned about.
There's a question from David Bridle, which I think it might be pertinent, and I haven't seen in our questions, I think, already. David says, some people are experiencing fever within a day or two of the vaccine. While this may be an effect of the vaccine, it is one of the recognised side effects. Is the guidance to still isolate and take a PCR test to ensure this isn't coincidental timing for the onset of a COVID infection? Because obviously you could still be vulnerable immediately post vaccination. Giovanni, would you like to pick that up?
Yeah, absolutely. And David, that is a very good question. Much depends also on the other symptoms you get, because as you know, we got the PHE guidelines with a clear list of symptoms for which when you classify then to take a PCR test is certainly something I would consider, in particular when if you also develop, for example, cough, or you lose your sense of smell, or for example, also sense of taste. That is something I would definitely consider, that potentially you may have to do, unfortunately, PCR for that. Let's be clear, the vaccine does not cause COVID because it doesn't contain any active COVID. Okay, and I can see also in the chat that some people ask what we can do. When I had some pain, for example, in my shoulder after I took the vaccine, and I have to admit, as a male with a very low threshold of pain, I just took some paracetamol, for example, and it disappeared literally in half a day, and I was back in shape. But it's very reasonable question.
Thank you.
Probably also just to add that on the other hand, it is a good sign of a good immune response if you do respond with flu-like symptoms. So it's not primarily something to worry about.
Thank you, Frank. That is helpful and reassuring. The next question is one for you again, Ben. Is it safer for Black and minority ethnic staff to receive the Oxford vaccine?
Another really good question, and we're certainly really aware of the disproportionate impact of COVID on minoritized groups, on Black and minority ethnic people in the UK and around the world, and so it's really important for us to be paying attention to these questions. The answer at the moment is that there is no clear difference. There's no difference at all between the effects of the different vaccines on people from different ethnic origins. The two vaccines have been obviously developed in a number of countries, so across the US, the UK, Brazil, and South Africa. The demographics, so the ethnicity and age and sex of those patients has been measured and tracked. So we know that there are no differences in the effectiveness or the safety of those vaccines depending on ethnic groups. It's very understandable, though, for people to be kind of concerned or skeptical. Unfortunately, I suppose medicine and healthcare and big drug companies generally don't have a great history when it comes to treating people fairly. There have been lots of scandals in the past, but I think we can be as reassured as we're able at the moment that the monitoring of these vaccines and their development, which has obviously had the world's eyes on them, has ensured that we're happy that they are as safe and effective for everybody as possible. While I'm on, I can see in the chat my reassurance about the risks of allergies hasn't reassured everyone. I absolutely understand that. I think it's impossible for us to give 100% reassurance, but from the studies that we've done, and as I say, the vaccine has already been tested on hundreds of thousands of people, that there is nothing to suggest that they are any more dangerous than any other vaccine or any other medicine. And we do know that coronavirus infection can cause significant harm and long-term disability and death as well. So like with pretty much everything in life, it's a question of balancing the risks and deciding which risk you're happier to take.
Thank you, Ben. Giovanni, there's another question that's come up that I think perhaps you could pick up on, which I've seen a few times now, and it's about the issue of the second dose. And I know you've addressed this partly already in terms of efficacy and when the Pfizer one kicks in and so on. But people are asking, if they cannot have the second dose on the projected dates of 77 days, what is the flexible timeline to having the second dose?
Yes, and I can appreciate a lot of confusion on that because there has been a lot of misinformation about that, unfortunately. So let's start with the Oxford vaccine because there is actually evidence for the Oxford vaccine. When you check the original paper, actually Oxford not only is given the vaccine within 3 weeks, so 21 days, but they've also given the vaccine within actually 3 months. So like, for example, 12 weeks, okay? So they actually have the data of what's happened when you actually dilute the interval between the first and the second dose. And that is actually with the Oxford vaccine, something very interesting happened, because actually when you dilute your interval, okay, between the first and the second dose, you actually, response after the first dose is actually increased compared to only when you give the vaccine only after 21 days. So there was actually a 5% increase in efficacy in the vaccine. That is actually good news because that means actually you can vaccinate as many people as you want, as you can with the first dose, and then you can give the second dose after. That is pretty much what the government and public health are suggesting. So the controversy is in particular for the Pfizer vaccine, and the controversy is simple because simply there aren't data on that, because when Pfizer designed the clinical trial to give the vaccine, is only considered the option of giving the second dose within 21 days. And that is how the trial was designed. They didn't think at the time, oh, maybe we need to check also a longer interval. So the fact then that they haven't tried doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't work, because actually from a biological point of view, we actually know that if you give time to your body to develop antibodies, the majority of people will develop them. And we know that 90% of people will be protected after the Pfizer vaccine after 90 days. So the last point about this, because again, you will see in some of the website, and I think we need to be very honest and transparent, you will see that the MHRA has authorized the Pfizer vaccine only with an interval of maximum 42 days. Again, that is the authorization they got. So that means if they give you the second dose after 42 days, that is theoretically an off-license indication. I'm not particularly concerned about any off-license because we give a lot of medicine off-license. I can tell you, for example, we've used like an antibiotic, fosfomycin, here in UK to treat urinary infection off-license, like for nearly 10 years because it was off license, but actually that doesn't necessarily mean is actually legal or it cause harm at all. It's just unfortunately because the original bureaucratic application was made in a specific way, and that is what is happening now. But I think is absolutely reasonable, and the strategy of the government to try to vaccinate as many people as possible, and then dilute the time when you give actually the second dose. The balance at the end is between an individual interest, so let's say myself, versus actually the public health interest of the entire population in UK. And I think we have to prioritize public health in this case.
Thank you, Giovanni. There's a question that's come up that I think we ought to pick up now, actually, and that's from Maria Miller, and it's about the constituents of the Pfizer vaccine. We haven't actually, although that's in the document, the details of that, we haven't actually directly addressed that. And Maria's concern is that the Pfizer vaccine contains DNA, which I think if you could address, please, Giovanni.
Yeah, so remember that our genome is formed by two main things, the DNA. So the DNA is the one that is inside the nucleus, okay? And then the DNA gets translated in what is called RNA, okay? So DNA to RNA, because then the RNA, and you will get different type of RNA, the RNA then become proteins, okay? So the RNA itself, I don't know if you remember from biochemistry and biology when you were at university, I'm pretty sure some of you that probably studied it 20 years ago, if it's not even more. So what's happening is that the RNA goes literally inside the ribosome, okay, that are outside the nucleus, and then the ribosome pretty much they decodified the RNA to become proteins, and that's how you produce then your proteins in the body. So now the Pfizer vaccine is actually RNA, okay? So that means the RNA will never enter inside your nucleus, okay? So will never actually officially enter inside and be in contact with your DNA. What will simply happen in your cells is that RNA will actually go through the ribosome, then they will produce only the spike proteins, that is the one we want from the virus, because we want them to develop antibodies and T-cell response against that. And then pretty much once we've done the job, there are a lot of enzymes inside our cells that are actually able to destroy the RNA because they do it routinely. And so what's what will happen? After the vaccine has done its function, our body will just get rid of it because we will have antibodies and we will not need it anymore. And hopefully I've been very simple and very basic in explaining this.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. A question that I've seen a couple of times coming up, it's the same one, so I think I'm happy to answer it, and it'll be there, and I'll leave it to the rest of the panelists to make up their own mind about this. But we've been asked if have we had the vaccine ourselves. You don't have to say why, but I think people would like to know. I'm very happy to answer that. I have had the vaccine. I'm in an older age group and a vulnerable, there's all sorts of reasons, but anyway, I have had the vaccine. I had the Pfizer vaccine towards the end of December. I had minimal, sadly, in fact, minimal side effects to it. According to you, Frank, that's not so good, but nonetheless, I had minimal side effects, and I'm due to have a second dose, I think, at the beginning of March. I don't know if any of the others want to comment.
So I go next. Yes, I had the Pfizer vaccine a week ago, and I had no side effects. I felt for one day a little bit tired, and that's it. I have had previously a COVID infection last year with complete loss of smell and taste. So I had antibodies, and that's a question that came up as well, which is why I mentioned it, that the vaccination is still required, even though you may have had COVID or may have been tested positively for antibodies in the past.
And I can answer also that question. Thanks, Frank, for developing that answer. So yes, I had the same the vaccine because, of course, I work in an infectious disease ward. So for us, it was probably a priority to actually immunize all staff. And again, it seems like all of us, we received the Pfizer one, but that is just a pure chance. It's just because the Oxford one wasn't simply available by the time we got vaccinated. So to go back to the answer, can you get the vaccine after COVID? Yes, you can. So the general advice is to wait at least 2 or ideally 4 weeks before you get the vaccine after COVID. And the simple reason for that is because probably if you have COVID recently, you probably got an IgM in your blood. So that means the IgM, they may bind to the vaccine and they may prevent your immune response to actually produce IgG, that are the long-term ones. Okay, so the general advice is after COVID, wait ideally 4 weeks. Okay, so in terms of then how long after all of that, so the CDC from United States, they suggest an average time of 90 days after your infection. And that's because we know that your immune system, your antibodies will start to decrease after 3 months. So if you actually get your vaccine between the 4 weeks and the 90 days after you had your original infection, you are actually reassured that then your body will get a booster again, and you will be you will hype your level of antibodies again.
I can make it 100%. I can confirm I had my first dose of vaccine last week as well, which I was very happy to do. I helped to look after our kind of COVID patients on Fothergill ward at East Ham Care Centre. I had the Pfizer vaccine as well. I can see there's lots of questions in the chat about sort of choice between Pfizer and AstraZeneca, which one we would choose. Are people going to get a choice? I think the reason that we all had the Pfizer vaccine is that that was what was available when we had the vaccine. And as we said, at the moment, from the trial evidence that we have and from our understanding about how these vaccines work, there's really very little to choose between them. They're both as effective and as safe. And so the best vaccine to have is the one that you have, is the one that's there for you. The main differences between Pfizer and AstraZeneca so far, and in terms of the rollout and where they're being used, is the storage and the requirements to sort of warm up or reconstitute them in different ways. It just tends to be what's more practical for the setting that you're having the vaccine in. So it's just sort of historical quirk that we've all had the Pfizer vaccine. If I was offered the AstraZeneca one, I would gladly take that instead.
Thank you very much. Can we come to another question? I'm aware of time pressing, and I want to touch on, I think we need to touch on this one because it's pertinent now particularly. Frank, this is one for you. What is this new variant of the coronavirus? What's that about? How will that have an impact on the current vaccination program we have? And should we expect more variants?
So this is one of the hot topics that we hear about a lot at the moment. There's on the news today, this new Brazilian strain. So I think it's really important to remind ourselves that the SARS-CoV virus mutates regularly. I mean, it's estimated, people say about every 2 weeks. Many of those mutations are essentially silent, so they do not translate into any change in the way the proteins are coded. And the evidence so far is that the new variants do not result in more severe illness and or impact on the efficacy of the vaccinations, because the vaccines actually produce an immune response to a range of spike proteins. And so at the moment, the science tells us that we do not expect any changes in the way the efficacy has already been described. I think it is, however, an issue that the scientists are observing quite carefully. The question as to what it means if new variants are produced that change the way the virus operates, I think depends on 2 issues, because there's been a lot of discussion about what means more transmissible. Transmissible essentially has been misconstrued as we need to change our PPE, but the way the virus is entering your body has not changed. It's just the way the virus locks onto the receptors in the system. So that means it causes more infection, so it's more contagious. And that in essence means then it becomes more transmissible. But the scientific discussion at the moment suggests that it could well be that the mutations actually, even though the virus is more likely to log on to the human cells, can also result in reduced functional abilities otherwise in terms of creating a severe infection. So I think mutations are happening, so we can definitely expect more strains to be detected, but they're not necessarily meaning that we have to worry about those mutations. And at the moment, as I said, the science suggests that there is no evidence for more severe illnesses and or slipping through the net, so to speak, of the vaccinations.
Thank you very much, Frank. Giovanni, if I could just, I know you have answered this one, but it's recurring again and again in the chat, and I think it would be helpful if there's still there's a lot of concern about the different vaccines. What's on offer in the trust? Why are some people having one rather than the other? Someone has also asked, does it have to be, are they all 2 dose? I think they are. Yes, that is confirmed. But if you could just say a little bit more about the different vaccines in line with what's in the chat, that'd be helpful.
Yes, absolutely. And apologies, I believe I may have replied to single people. Of course, I'm completely technologically unwise. So in terms of the vaccine, yes, let's explain the 2 main ones, the 3 main ones, because Pfizer and Moderna are pretty much identical. Okay, so Pfizer and Moderna are, again, they are RNA vaccines. Okay, so that's as we explained, when they will go through your ribosome, you will produce then the spike protein, and then you will produce the antibodies. The Oxford one is a completely different type of mechanism that again is being used before, and that means they use a vector that can be, for example, an adenovirus, but then the vector can carry on then the same, again, some material from COVID, and that is again to expose your body to, for example, to the same protein that COVID has, but without actually causing the infection, because the adenovirus will not really cause any specific infection. So that is why the mechanisms are different. Then you will see more and more will come over months. So you have seen there is also a Russian vaccine, there is also a Chinese one. Again, some of them, they will never arrive, for example, in UK, but some of them, they may have a different mechanism, because of course, vaccinology is a very vaccinated field, how to develop a vaccine. So in terms of the 2 doses, yes, you will need to receive the 2 doses if you want to have probably a long-term protection. Again, we don't know how long this protection will last, because inevitably the vaccines are too recent to know how long. It can be 1 year, it can be 5 years. Unfortunately, no one's got the answer. Time will tell us. But again, it's not abnormal for a vaccine to get a booster. For example, you need to get your DTP booster, for example, after 10 years, or for hepatitis B, if I guess most of you are vaccinated, you have to get, like, for example, 3 different doses. And I had to have a 4th dose of hepatitis B because I didn't mount an immune response with the first 3. So again, unfortunately, in 1-2 years' time, we will know if we need again another booster of the vaccine, or is actually not necessary.
Thank you, Giovanni. Ben, there's one other question I think we haven't touched on yet that I think it'd be helpful for us to explore a little bit. Can I still pass on the virus if I've been vaccinated? And do I still need to self-test if I've had the vaccine?
Yeah, again, really good questions. And this is something I think where in the optimism around the vaccine, some of the messaging has maybe got a bit muddled. Yes, you do still need to take all of the precautions that we're currently taking against spread. Like we've said, we don't yet know how well the vaccine will prevent infection, prevent spread of infection. it's reasonable to guess or to hope that it will reduce our infectivity, but we just don't have the data yet, and that's what's being studied at the moment. We'll see the effects on kind of infection rates as the vaccine is rolled out, but at the moment, if you are needing to shield, you still need to shield even after the vaccine. If you're working in a clinical setting, you still need to use all of the same PPE and the hand hygiene that we'd advise. And in terms of kind of interacting with other people and following the sort of social distancing requirements, you still need to do that. If you are one of the staff members who's using the twice weekly lateral flow testing, then continue to do that as part of our toolkit to prevent spread. There's nothing to suggest, and no real plausible mechanism for the vaccine interfering with the test results. So if you get a positive lateral flow test after the vaccine, it's because you've been infected with coronavirus coincidentally. It's not to do with the vaccine. So keep on testing and keep on doing everything else that we're doing to prevent the spread until or unless we know that it's safe to start relaxing those precautions.
Robbie, can I suggest that a number of questions have been related to the potential of long-term side effects? I think that came up again and again. And maybe between Giovanni and Ben, if you could address that very question.
So again, Ben, you can add also your comment on this. That is inevitably of course a very reasonable fear of any vaccine on the long-term side effect. But I'm a very practical person, and I always think, I'm sorry, we're getting so many vaccines and during our life for everything else, and none of them they actually cause really long-term side effects. So I don't really see why the COVID vaccine should be actually any different, considering is actually some of the mechanism of the way of producing it. They are similar, or even if they are different, they are still very safe. So again, I was happy to get the vaccine, and I would be very happy to get the second dose. But Ben, I'm not sure if you want to add anything else.
No, absolutely. And again, I mean, it comes back to that sort of balance of risks. At the moment, obviously, we can't say hand on heart that we know that it's going to be safe in the long term because we don't have a long term to demonstrate. But from all of the other vaccines and all of the other medicines that we've used that work in similar ways, we know that the risk is very low. We also do know that the risk of long-term complications and sometimes disabling conditions from having coronavirus infection is real. I'm seeing in my clinical practice, I'm seeing lots of patients who've had COVID weeks or months ago who are still devastatingly fatigued, who can't get back to work, who have difficulty getting out of bed every day. We don't know the long-term effects on people's bodies from the coronavirus infection. So if you wanted to weigh up the risks of a possible side effect from the vaccine or a more probable long-term effect from the coronavirus, I know which one I would take. There is reassurance, and we've talked before about how the drug companies have asked for kind of immunity from legal action if there do turn out to be problems. That doesn't mean that people don't have recourse. For about 40 years now in the UK, there's been the vaccine compensation scheme for people who have been injured or disabled as a result of vaccination, and that applies to the coronavirus vaccines as well. So in the very, very small possibility that somebody suffers a severe reaction to the vaccine, which ends up with them having long-term harm or long-term disability, then there's a government sponsored compensation scheme exactly for that reason. But again, no reason for us to think that that there's any more likelihood of a long-term effect from this vaccine as any other vaccine. I
guess this is partially related to the worries that remind us of the MMR vaccine debate, the Wakefield disaster. For those who are interested in long-term effects, for some little while ago, I put together a document that has been posted, and I can recirculate that on the flu vaccination long-term side effects. And it was quite interesting to scan the literature thoroughly for that. And you will see there how very few incidents have been reported over time.
Thank you, Frank. One last question. I think, Ben, this is perhaps one for you again. It's one that's come up a number of times. If I've had COVID and I have the antibodies, do I need to get vaccinated? And what if I have long COVID? I'm just because people think.
Yeah, again, really important questions. And as Giovanni said, we do know that most people who've had natural COVID infection develop an antibody response, and we would assume that that would be protective. Again, we'll know more in a year or 5 years or 10 years of study and science. But what we don't know is how effective that is and how long it lasts. So it makes sense to have the additional protection that we would expect to get from the vaccine too. And like Giovanni said, though, because of the risk that the vaccine would interact with your natural antibodies, we'd suggest waiting between 2 and 4 weeks after your first COVID symptoms or after the first positive test before having your first dose of COVID vaccine.
To say the poll is still running, so if you could please, we're approaching the last couple of minutes of this session. If you could please indicate on that whether you are more or less likely to have the vaccination now, bearing in mind that some of you will already have done so. Thank you very much for that. We only have a few minutes left. I'd like to ask any of the panelists if they have any last comments or observations that they'd like to make at this point, bearing in mind all the questions. I would just like to say we will look at all the questions afterwards, and any that we haven't answered, we will do that and get back to people with that.
I think it's worth to mention, Ravi, that there were a number of questions related to personal circumstances that are not of such generic nature. We will definitely respond to those as well. Some people asked about medicines and underlying conditions, and how does that interfere? How does that stop them from taking the vaccination? And again, that's a very important question. We will certainly respond to those individually. The Q&A document that we put together will address everything we've said today and a number of additional questions that we couldn't cover.
Okay, are there any other questions or any other observations for us to make? No? All right, in that case, well, I think we've had a very informative session, and I want to thank our panelists very much. Everybody's very hard pressed, I know. It's been an awful time. It's been an awful year for many of us. I do know that many staff have lost friends, lost family, colleagues, and patients, and I do know it's been a very difficult time for everybody. The vaccination, the vaccine that we've all been waiting, or the vaccines that we've all been waiting for, have finally arrived. I hope we've been able to set people's minds at rest, and we'll continue to do that. If you have questions, as Frank said, please do bring them forward to any of us. We will do our utmost to reassure you, and I'm very sorry if we've missed anyone. As you can see, there have been a lot of questions, but we will get round to them all eventually, and I hope you'll feel that it's reassured and that it is safe to join the programme. Okay, so thank you all very much, and as I said, we will be posting this on our website, and hopefully further beyond that. Thank you. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Bye.